Hey guys, welcome to session number 47 of the Trailer Music Composers Podcast. Come on, duck. One man with one microphone, whose favorite emoji is the poo emoji. Welcome to the Trailer Music Composers Podcast. Hey guys, welcome to another session of the Trailer Music Composers Podcast, and we have a wonderful one today. As you know, it is the second part of the Ruben Nava interview. He's the guy that created Music Junkies, and oh mate, he's just so much wonderful stuff going on. I was particularly fond of the fact that he was there recording Don LaFontaine saying, "In a world," which many of you have noted that I took inspiration from with my one man introduction to the podcast. So it was really lovely to hear about that. And this week he talks about libraries, working with immediate music, the term epic music, dealing with covers, sound design, licensing, fees, you name it. It's a really wonderful, diverse conversation again. I do hope you enjoy this one. Here we go. So you've gone from being the sound guy to from cutting tape. Now you're the guy that, actually he does the research, and now you're the music supervisor. Then what was the next move? I mean, to create the situation that you're in now?
Well, for that, you got to understand where music libraries were at the time. And again, this was, late 80s, early 90s, late 80s really, is when I was getting very frustrated because as a music supervisor, I now had the go-ahead to bring in other libraries. Now, just to give you an idea of how libraries functioned at the time, you'd have to pay a fee, an annual fee, to have a music library in-house. And, they'd send you, by this time, CDs were being printed and all that. So you'd get, a mountain of CDs, and they would charge you an annual fee for that. Occasionally they would waive, some of the libraries would waive that fee if you used them enough, but if you didn't, they'd charge you this fee. If you lost one of their CDs, they'd charge you $100 to replace that CD. And that was a lot back then. And, that's inconceivable today to do something like that, to charge your client for having your music there at their disposal. And the thing is, the music was terrible. At least it was terrible for trailers. The music that was in libraries at the time was geared for people who couldn't afford a band. And that's another thing, is that bands didn't like their music used in commercials. And fair enough, most of the commercials were, these late night cable, somebody trying to sell you a mattress or a TV, crazy Gideon, used TV things, or, You're Killing Me, Larry, these like mattress guys that would sell, mattresses at like 4 a.m. And, just really, really not blockbuster film material at all. Right. So in trying to get music, the studios also weren't really set up to license. So it became very common for an editor to work with all these soundtracks, but then you couldn't get any of those soundtracks. And so they'd usually call somebody to score it. And then that person, back then, Aspic was using this guy, Randy Stern. And Randy Stern was a great guitarist, kind of a rock composer kind of guy. But he didn't, in my opinion, really have the orchestral stuff nailed down. In all fairness, back then the samples were terrible as well compared to what they are today. So it didn't sound right. And he was put in a position where, hey, you got to try to sound like this major motion picture soundtrack, and you got to do it in 2 days. And it was just, the tools weren't there for it. But that's when I kind of got the idea of, I know what we need. I know what editors are constantly asking me for, and I know what I can and cannot find. And I'm looking, I have every library in the world at my disposal. It's in-house. I have a mountain of CDs here. that I never use because there's nothing in here that works for anything outside of comedy. And by that, I mean, like, there's some comedic effects, that they had, and we would use those, but we'd never use one of those libraries for a major motion picture campaign. They're just not what they were doing. And that's when I kind of came up with the idea of like, hey, no library is writing trailer music. So I pitched the idea to Aspect, and I said, why don't we work with some composers that instead of giving them 2 days to work on something, let's give them a week or two or even a month to work on something to get it sounding to where it approximates a soundtrack, and we can actually license it and it sounds good. And they kind of said, listen, if you want to do this project on your own, do it, but don't do it on the clock. So I started doing it on weekends. And, mind you, I was working 70, 80 hours a week sometimes at Aspect. And then on the weekends, I would get together with composers and I'd say, hey, write some of this stuff because here's what the editors tell me is what they need. So if you write this stuff, I can get it into the hands of editors and we can probably license it. I would say 99.9% of the composers I approached basically said, I'm not writing anything for free. If you need me to do that, especially something that's that labor intensive, I need to get paid up front. I didn't have a budget. Aspect didn't give me a budget to, pursue this. They just said, yeah, you can do it. Just do it on your own time. Do it on your own. So a couple of guys tried and a couple of guys did. And then I licensed a couple of things, but it was not great. It was just very mediocre. It wasn't really the vision I had to create, a music library of big sounding score stuff, and the term epic came around. As far as I know, it happened early 90s, I think it was, when the MPAA was getting complaints that the trailers were too long. And you'd go see a movie and you'd get 20, 25 minutes worth of trailers and people were complaining about it. So the MPAA imposed a rule that trailers could only be 90 seconds tops. And they made an exception that you could have one trailer be your exception for the year. For each studio would have this, their epic trailer, which was 2.5 minutes, up to 2.5 minutes. And that was their way of cutting down on the amount of time, the amount of trailers that were being played, the amount of time that people would wait before their feature would start. And so editors started coming up and saying, hey, I'm working on the exception, the epic trailer. So I'm going to need some epic music. And pretty soon that kind of entered the lexicon. And I would transfer, some of the biggest sounding music onto film. And, at that point, I think we were migrating into 3/4 inch. So, I would label it, epic music. And then that, that's just a term I picked up from the editors because they were calling it that because the MPAA was calling it that. And, pretty soon it just became a thing, it's like epic music. It just became like, you know what it was just by calling it that. And so nobody was writing this kind of stuff, at least not at the library level. And I was talking to Edwina over at APM and, nobody had it. No, just nobody had it. Everything was, if they did have a soundtrack, it was usually an old score that sounded like, some, Carl Stalling thing or, Bernard Herrmann thing, but, not Bernard Herrmann, it just, the orchestration was just not, I mean, if you're working on a, period piece or a goth movie or something like that, then yeah, it's great for that. But, to try to showcase a brand new blockbuster, it just sounded dated, it just didn't sound right. So I approached a number of composers and, nobody was willing to do the work until a couple of guys walked in. They had scored a couple of trailers, nothing major, but they showed me their reel and they sounded pretty good. And I was like, oh, these guys are good. And it's by the name of Jeff Feynman and Yoav Gorin. And just like all other composers, I pitched the idea. They were Immediate Music, but Immediate Music wasn't a library at the time. They were a composing duo. And I pitched the idea just like I did with every other composer. And when I saw the look on Yo's face, I realized this guy gets it. Like he got it. He got it immediately. And I'm like, oh, okay, we're onto something here. So they wanted to know more. So we explored what to do. And we kind of worked out a deal where I would let them know what it is that editors need. And we would, massage these pieces into what could be used. And I knew what was coming down the pipeline. So, then we got together. I remember we went to a restaurant on Sunset and, I helped them, establish a rate card because they wanted to know how much, trailers were paying at the time and what a composer would get paid. And we were going to price it just below that because obviously if we were above that, then why not just hire somebody to score it? So we came up with a rate card and we kind of worked out a deal where, okay, I'm going to give you some ideas. You're going to write them and then I'm going to pitch them. And they said, yeah, but we want to pitch them as well. So we worked out a deal where, okay, these tracks that we're working on, they're going to pitch them as Immediate Music and I was going to pitch them as Music Junkies. And so for a while there, we were pitching some of the same tracks, but I was also working with other composers. So I was pitching other tracks and they were also writing stuff that I wasn't getting from them. They were, they learned really quickly. They realized that there's a certain formula here, and they were really good. So they, the learning curve was really short with them. So they ended up picking up on this thing and writing a lot of stuff on their own, which they were selling as Immediate Music. And then they'd give it to me and I'd, try to get it into a trailer. Now, if it was a piece of Immediate Music that I had nothing to do with, that was licensing went through them. But if it was one of the tracks that I helped create, and I wasn't writing any of it, but I was providing the initial idea and I was even talking melodies and all that throughout the track, trying to get it to where we could sell it. And so those pieces became the ones I would sell. And we kind of had the market to ourselves. Like nobody was doing this. And we were landing trailers left and right. And pretty soon, in the blink of an eye, I had, at least a couple thousand trailers that I had licensed music to, and so did they.
Wow.
So yeah, it was like finding a fishing hole that nobody knew about. And we had just the right lure and we cast that and we were just bringing in fish like there was no tomorrow. And then all of a sudden, other people started finding out about that fishing hole and other people started showing up and sometimes even with a better lure, like when X-Ray Dog, when Mitch and Tim, they came up to my house one time. They wanted to join Music Junkies, but they, to their credit, they were like, you know what, we got this, we can do this. And then they came out with, that track that they used for Lord of the Rings, which I heard that and I was like, okay, well, I'm getting my ass kicked here. So, at that point I realized, okay, so we can't get comfortable here. And I remember Yo talking to me and saying, we should have recognized that it was an anomaly what we had, that it was bound to be picked up by other people. And, sure enough, cut to today, the market's very saturated with, umpteen libraries. So, wow. Yeah. But I wouldn't be where I am without them. And I think they would probably say the same.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. So that was, it was almost like a simultaneous birth of Immediate Music and Music Junkies at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, again, Immediate existed as a composing duo. The idea to become a music library was the idea that I pitched to them, and Music Junkies has always been basically just a music library. But of course, being a music library, you also get requests to score stuff. And then at that point, I basically go with whatever composer fits the bill the best, because like you were saying, everybody has their unique style.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
even Jeff and Yo have, Jeff is great with percussive stuff. He's just, great at that. And Yo is really good at these, sweeping melodies. So, every composer has their own forte.
Oh yeah, I couldn't agree more. And some have a broader reach than others.
Yeah.
I think something that's often overlooked when it comes to composition is your ease and speed of delivery. Because you can have an incredibly talented writer who manages to smash a track out in a day, or an equally talented writer who struggles to smash it out over a week.
Yeah.
And I think that's often overlooked with regard to people getting into the industry as a composer. I mean, how...
Yeah. And often you don't have the luxury of being a perfectionist if you have a deadline. Like, you may be 90% there, and you're just going to have to live with that 10% that's bugging you just to get it out the door and make sure that your client, has something to present. Because that's actually happened a couple of times. I remember one of the owners of the other owner of Aspect, Bob Israel. I recommended this one composer, and he just didn't deliver in time, and he had to go to a meeting empty-handed and basically say, it's coming, which is never a good position to be in.
No, not for that composer either.
Yeah, true. And I got caught in the same situation once too, where I had to ask for more time and just couldn't make the deadline. So you missed the presentation. And, luckily it wasn't something that was, like they had bought satellite time, because then that can be really expensive. You definitely don't want to miss one of those. So,
I just want to... I'm very curious to know about, you've had quite a full experience of the trailer music industry from back in the day when it was licensing of existing film scores, through to custom work, and now through to libraries as they are now. How has the landscape of fees changed over time?
It's changed differently depending on the music. The drones, the stings, the sound effects, the sound design stuff, the simple sound design stuff has gone down. There was a time where we could charge several $1,000s for, a simple drone, just because they weren't around. And that has gone down, whereas some of the other stuff has gone up. I think if you have, vocals, choirs, live orchestra, all that kind of stuff, you can still get top dollar for that. If you've got, obviously if you've got a hit song, a recognizable song, or a known artist, you can get, top dollar for that. So the higher tier stuff, if they like it, if they love it, they will pay for it. If it's something that can be replaced, they'll replace it if they, can save a buck. And it really always comes down to that. Like people, a lot of friends, aspiring composers, they ask me, what should this be priced at? And without getting into any kind of, trying to like set a price standard for everybody, you can kind of just say, look, it always comes down to how replaceable is your track. If it's hard to replace, you're going to end up being able to charge more. If it's easy to replace and you charge too much, then they're going to replace it. Now, what determines how replaceable it is can be complicated, because then you get into, a lot of guys feel like, hey, this track has this or that, or, it's live and, it can't be replicated that easily. But you got to put yourself in the client's perspective and say, yeah, okay, your track might be live and this one is not, but you put it behind a bunch of sound effects, and maybe the difference is 10, 20%, but the price difference is, 80, 90%. And so they go, okay, well, maybe I'll just go with this one instead. So you got to really think about how replaceable is your track and, price it accordingly.
That's really good advice. And in actual fact, I've never heard it put like that before. It was, whenever I've heard people talk about fees, it's been about working out in a much more sort of calculated way. Yeah, what's the distribution? What's the
that's part of it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if a track is going to be used in a multitude of TV spots, and if it's the backbone of the campaign, but again, that is part of the replaceability. It's if they like it enough to use it in all the internet spots, all the radio spots for people that are still doing that, and home video. Home video, by the way, is making a little comeback. Lately, I've gotten some briefs for home video, and I'm like, what? Thought that was done with, but apparently it's back. Especially now, I guess, because everybody's at home watching stuff, so they're re-releasing stuff, and with productions on hold, they're dusting stuff off. So home video is back.
When you say home video, what do you mean?
VOD, the
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, they still call it home video for some reason, but yeah.
Like, I thought you meant VHS.
Yeah. Boy, Beta really got the raw end of the deal there, even though they were a better format.
Yeah,
but that's a different story.
Yeah.
But that's all part of the stuff you have to think about when you're pricing something. Is if they love it that much, it's going to be used in a ton of TV spots, but you don't really know that. So you gotta, I happen to know these guys, so I can call them up and say, hey, what's going on with this thing? But very often, you just get a quote request from the studio, and you have to, the attorneys err on the side of caution. So they almost always ask for all media, even if they're not using it for all media. And then sometimes, just to shave the cost down, they'll say all media excluding theatrical. And if that's the case, if they're asking for that, then you know that theatrical is pretty much done with, and they're really just asking for, everything except theatrical. So you have to know that and price accordingly. I just as something I should not go without mentioning is that in 2001, I met my partner, Robin, and she's helped me immensely. So I wouldn't have been able to do many things without her. And for those keeping count, Music Junkies is also female owned. So she's also an owner of the company. And so she's been dealing with a lot of that as well. Has been with me through every step, everything, all the good and all the bad, for the last, 20 years or so. So, I would be remiss not to mention her.
Well, go Robin. Yay.
Yeah. So, she does a lot of the, like nitty gritty work that I don't have patience for. So, I think between when we're both firing on all cylinders, I think we do a great job.
Do you mean she does a lot of the licensing stuff?
She issues a lot of the licensing. She does a lot of the marketing. She oversees all the artwork, a lot of the web stuff. Whatever needs to be done,
Awesome.
We do it. Yeah.
So, where are Music Junkies was the company you formed as a trailer music library. Where are you guys today? Because I know you've got a huge amount of trailers under your belt.
Yeah, 9 times out of 10, I'm usually at home. Working at home. But every now and then, when we do need to meet somebody, we do that. We've also been in any number of studios, depending on what the needs may be. But again, clients kind of stopped coming to the studios as much, so there wasn't really that much of a need for it. And it's been changing a lot. So been any number of places. I just couldn't see the the overhead for, when clients are basically just sending you emails and occasionally, a video chat, if that. They're super busy. And of course, LA traffic is terrible. So, you don't want to eat up your day traveling somewhere. That said, it's always great to sit in on a live session. So, live sessions, I mean, even that we've had to cut corners, we've done the whole Abbey Road thing and several other places for that matter, Budapest and Moscow and, LA and Seattle. But there was a time when we could license the same track multiple times, and that's not really the case anymore. Right now a client gets a track, and even if it's perfect, if it's been used in something else, they really don't want to touch it. So you have to factor that into your production costs.
Yeah, that's my experience of the trailer music industry is relatively small. Bigger than some, but it's only been sort of the last, where are we, 20, so sort of 7-8 years. And even in that time, I've noticed that where, the same track could license more. But recently, even the last couple of years, it's no one wants to license a track of mine that has been, especially if it's been on one of the features from more than 2 acts or more than an act. So because they'll be like, hey, we love this one of yours, but we don't want to license it because it was on this one.
Right. Now, and here's where you get into like, wait a minute, but you do realize, and I understand that they, where they're coming from, but, you do realize that if it's a hit song, like you'll not only hear it in multiple campaigns, sometimes you'll hear it in more than one campaign at the same time.
Yeah.
That DJ Shadow track, was, being played in a couple of trailers and also, I think a Cadillac commercial.
Yeah. I don't think anyone says that to Queen, do they?
Yeah, exactly. See, there are certain evergreen pieces, as they're known, and they're just, they get a pass, but you got to be at that level,
Yeah.
So not everybody, not everybody's Queen, not everybody is Beyonce,
Yeah, I definitely wasn't making a direct comparison between myself and Queen, by the way.
And Beyonce.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, no, she's not a thing. Yeah. Actually, it's funny because actually, I before I got into training music, I was predominantly in, so you'd call them commercials, advertising, product advertising over here, and the amount of adverts I was sort of one of 2 tracks, and the other track was Queen. It felt almost comical that I'd get to that point where they're saying, "Oh, they're having the meeting with the clients today, and it's your track," and I'd be like, "Yes, this is it. I'm going to land it," and they go, "Or Queen," and I go, "Oh no, I'm going to lose." Everyone's going to choose Queen.
Yeah, of course, and that gets us into that whole conversation about cover songs. It's like that's. I keep hearing how people hate to hear those things, and I actually hear that a lot from producers that do it. They keep saying, "Hey, I don't want to use another cover song," and then they go ahead and do it anyways.
Yep.
And the thing is, it's hard to beat. It's hard to beat something that instantly gets your attention because you recognize it, and it also has something new because you're doing it in a way nobody's heard it before. Although, again, doing a sad song cover seems to be kind of played out. But if you can do it in a way that's interesting, then it's hard to beat a hit. A hit has a lot of weight to it. It's hard. It's hard to beat that. So I think we're gonna keep hearing them for a little while, and maybe from the original artists, then also actually remixing it from the actual song, the actual tracks, the actual stems. That seems to be going on more and more these days. But for that, you need to get permission. So whereas anybody can do a cover and license the master side, not everybody can get the stems or the approval to do a remix of the original piece. And so that's where the trailer houses have an advantage, where they can contact the record label and get that stuff.
Yeah, I was just about to say, you still need permission to do a cover. It's just not quite as complicated.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, you should also know what is licensable, because some artists, don't like the license even still. I know a lot has changed because, you know, pre Napster, pre Motion Picture Experts Group, a lot of artists would not license to commercials or to trailers. And if they did, it was usually for really, really, really top dollar. The Nike commercials with Imagine or Start Me Up for Microsoft, where you're getting $1 million.
Yeah.
But prior, with those exceptions aside, it was considered not a cool thing to do to license your music for advertising. But as the music industry collapsed, I should say redefines itself, because it didn't. I guess it collapsed in its traditional sense, but it's kind of been evolving and redefining itself.
Yeah.
And now landing a commercial is very desirable, especially if it's a cool product.
Yeah. I think I heard something once that described the collapse of the music industry as the music industry becoming music industries, which I really liked. It becoming like a kind of like a positive take on the whole thing, rather than it be like the doom and gloom for the big companies. Actually, it's a chance for the industry to spread out and become many, many micro industries.
Yeah, and I think the record industry was kind of slow in embracing what was inevitable. There was no way, they tried to sue their way out of it, and there was no way that was going to happen. I know that, even downloading tracks was unsustainable and I always felt that because I just thought, back in the day, if you had a collection of a couple hundred records, you had a pretty good collection. But, now if you have a collection of, tens of thousands or even a couple 100,000 tracks, you can't expect some college student on a budget to pay 99 cents for each track. So, of course you're going to, find it somewhere and download it somewhere.
Yeah.
And I always felt like, hey, the easier you make for people to get this thing legally, the better. And they were doing the opposite. They were making it as hard as possible. And I always thought that was a mistake.
Yeah.
And now they're playing catch up, that said, I mean, we're not quite there yet. Nobody, I don't think, is that satisfied with the streaming revenue. And I know that's, that's a whole nother subject matter because, Spotify claims they pay 70% of their revenue out, and that really it's the publishers, that are holding on to that money. And I know that top artists are able to get more favorable deals. So yeah, who knows where it ends.
Yeah, but it's quite a grey area as well because there's no transparency, which I think it increases the frustrations. But
there is.
It's definitely. Sorry, go on.
No, it's. I was going to say, it's like when the record labels are also owners of the streaming sites, as part of the deal, then they kind of control everything, and they don't have to disclose it. So we don't really know what's going on there, but we do know that artists that can, have some pull are able to get pretty good deals, but the independent artists aren't. And, if you're doing the kind of music that doesn't normally get licensed, what do you do? What do you do, especially now when you can't tour, when you can't play live?
Yeah. You hope someone puts it on a playlist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, Ruben. I have so very, very much enjoyed this. And I can guarantee I'm going to be getting messages about this for many, many months to come. I would like to ask some. I normally do like a quick fire round at the end of the session. It's very much focused on composers. So I'm, as your role isn't specifically a composer. I just would like. I mean, you've kind of already answered this, but I kind of want it like a succinct. This is my advice. What is your advice today? We'll do a couple of scenarios for this because I get contacted by composers sort of on all steps of the ladder, as it were. For somebody starting out who's just found out about trailer music, because let's be honest, a lot of us don't realize it's a thing, who's just found out about it and realized how exciting it is, the prospect of being able to do such crazy stuff and actually earn a decent living from it. What would your advice be to them to take it from just mucking about as a hobby to landing their first placement?
Well, the thing is that there are going to be so many obstacles along the way because, as we know, it's a very competitive business. And I think the people that are doing it, I think the people that are successful, especially, are people who don't have a choice. It's in your blood. You're going to do it no matter what. I could tell you right now, don't do it. And you're going to do it anyways. I could cite any number of reasons why you shouldn't do it. I could tell you how terrible things are in many areas of music, and you're going to do it anyways because that's who you are. And once you realize if that is really who you are, if it really is in your blood, if it's in your makeup, if it's in your DNA, not only are you going to do it, but you're probably going to do it better than the person who doesn't have it in their DNA. Because it's who you are. It's in your makeup, It's the same reason that I kept getting fired was because I had no choice. I was going to listen to those damn soundtracks. You're not going to keep me from doing that. There's some stuff in there that I had to hear. And, here I'm being threatened with getting fired. And I did get fired many times. And I still kept doing it because you know what? It was bigger. What I was doing, I knew was bigger. And it's likewise with anybody who has it, in their makeup, in their DNA. It's like, it doesn't matter what the obstacles are. You're going to go, try to make the best of it. You're going to go through those obstacles. And if that's you, and if you know that you have that, if you know that you're made like that you're built like that you're built different, then that's an advantage that you have over the person that's just going through the motions.
Ruben, I think you were just... I'm not sure how I want to say this in a really poetic way, but I know I'm not going to be able to. But you were speaking on all the right frequencies for me, and I'm pretty sure you're speaking on all the right frequencies for most of the listeners too, because that's something you don't hear people talking about actually. That like it's just in there,
Yeah.
It's the fire, isn't it? That's
yeah. No, I mean I know some fantastic artists that are struggling, but they're going to keep doing it because it's who they are. And that makes me respect them to no end, because you could easily sell out. You could easily give up your thing and do something else, but you don't have a choice. That's who you are. And every now and then pursuing that passion will pay off. You got to find your happy medium. If you find it's not paying off for you, I mean, you also have to recognize, okay, maybe I should direct some of this effort into some other area, maybe change something, just still within your passion, still within something that gets you motivated to do what it is you have to do. But, poke around, like I said, I didn't map my future out. I took one logical step after another logical step. And then pretty soon it led to some things that I would have never been able to predict, never been able to map out. It's just those that do, you get into it, you get into you do your craft. And next thing you know, you're meeting somebody who can do something for your career or somebody. Yeah, I'll give you an example of some really weird random thing. Joe Bishara, he wrote for us back in the day, very early on, and he now scores a bunch of horror films. And he's like this horror guy. You go to his house, you go to his studio, and he's got all this horror paraphernalia all over the place. I mean, it looks like a haunted house all the time. And he just lives and breathes that stuff. And just by living and breathing it, things happen to him where he's now scoring, all these horror features. And, he told me the story about how it kind of came around. And through just coincidence, he ended up on jury duty and Sam Raimi was there. And nobody recognized Sam Raimi except he did, because that's his thing. So he was, geeking out, going, "Hey, that's Sam Raimi, here in a jury selection thing." And so
Amazing.
he went up and talked to him, and he's like, "Yeah, well, what do you do?" He's like, "I'm a composer." He's like, "Oh, as well, I'd like to hear your stuff." And he's like, "I'd love to send it." And he loved it, and next thing you know, now Joe is scoring all of his features. So it's just Joe being Joe, and Joe being Joe led to this career. And again, not mapped out, not don't knock yourself for not having a plan. Just know that if you're doing something that's your passion, some opportunity will happen. Just it may not be the perfect situation, but like I said, one step followed by another step, and next thing you know, you look back and you're like, "Yeah, look where I am now."
I think you hinted at this right at the start of our conversation when you talked about getting lucky, but you'll find that, and I'm sure you'll agree. I think your story testifies this that luck tends to follow the people who are pursuing the things that they want to pursue.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've got you got to be realistic too. I've got a friend of mine who he's been wanting to direct. Now he's gotten many offers to do other jobs that I felt that had he taken them, it may have led to his ultimate goal. But he's a guy who just refused to do anything except the ideal, perfect job, which was, he wanted to direct. And if it wasn't directing, he was not going to do it. He felt like it was time spent away from him pursuing his dream of directing. And I felt like, wait, but you're being offered this job that is within that same entertainment field, and maybe you get in there, maybe you meet somebody, maybe years go by, and next thing you know, you are directing. And so it really, to each his own. I mean, he has one approach about it, I have a different approach about it. And I'm not saying one is better than the other, because I've also known some people that just set their goals so high and they meet them. But if that's not the case, then maybe find some other thing where you can feel happy about what you're doing, and then do that until it doesn't feel right, and then take the next step. And if it continues to feel right, again, you're going to get to a point where you look back and you're like, "Hey, I'm here," before you realize it.
Yeah,
And it's tough. It's a tough industry. I mean, put it this way, at least you're not like trying to make a living at like you know like all these people who do spoken word. I'm like, that's tough. And yet, every now and then you get somebody who's iconic in that.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's like the hero's journey, isn't it? That actually you might have set a path for yourself, but maybe the dark, winding road going off that seems to be away from where you want to get is actually the journey that you need to take. Because like you said at the start, you were saying how like you just something would come up and you'd be like, oh, okay, let's see what happens with this. That like you did with Jeff and Yo. Where you were like, okay, I think there's this thing. Let's try this. It wasn't necessarily the easy option because they didn't pay you or anything, but you've got to do that sometimes, even if it doesn't necessarily feel like the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, that reminds me. One of the things I asked them to do was because that editor, Jim Hale, that I mentioned, who was one of the founders of Trailer Park, he came up to me one day while I was music supervising an aspect, and he said, "Hey, I'm cutting this trailer, and I'm using that A Day in the Life from the Beatles, and I'm using just that end part that just is this big rise." And he's like, "We'll never be able to license the Beatles." He's like, "Can you find me a rise?" And at the time, there weren't any. Like, I searched and searched and searched and searched, and no one had a rise. And I did end up eventually finding one in, I believe it was Dead Presidents, but we couldn't get it in time. And then that was a situation where I identified, a need for a type of cue. And I came up to, Jeff and Yo, and I said, "Hey, we need a track like, the Beatles' Staying Alive. And so they wrote this Rise, and that Rise got used again and again and again. And then we made others. And then, Nick Phoenix, also was, contributing tracks. And I said, hey, Nick, do this, do that. And, Nick later went on to, form Two Steps from Hell. And yeah, he also got a lot of this, intel, basically, for lack of a better word, as to what to do for trailers.
Yeah.
And he and his then partner, Fred Rappaport, wrote a lot of stuff for us as well that did really well. But that was born of a need for that Rise. And then now, I don't think there's a library who doesn't have a whole bunch of those things.
Well,
so yeah, all these little trends, they all have a story behind them.
I love that one because I am a huge fan of risers. Whether I'm using them as a compositional tool or whether I'm listening to them being used in trailers, I absolutely love them.
It's one of those things that kind of transcended trailers, and you hear them, everywhere. You hear them in TV spots, you hear them in, car commercials, all sorts of stuff. It became a thing, even though at the time, they weren't around, at the time. I did, the earliest one I remember hearing is, if you listen to the trailer for Hellraiser, I think that was back in 88 or 87 or something like that. You hear, that's the first one I've ever heard. And, I listen to a lot of these things. But then after, Jeff and Yo did theirs, and then Nick as well did several of them. After that, they started taking off. And then other guys, Bobby Ito from Q Source Music, he kind of made a living at, sound design and, doing these short pieces that get licensed a lot, not for as much money, but they license a lot more frequently. So
see there's a very famous sort of swish hit that's been used like a huge amount of times. Was that him who did that? Bobby Ito?
Maybe. I don't know if we're talking about the same one, but he did have that, so it might have been. And, every library has their sound effect kind of cue that, tends to get licensed a lot. Whether it be, a drop or, a power down or some sort of rise or some, big hit or whatever. But yeah, and yeah, good to have those again, building up a portfolio of not just the big epic hybrid stuff, but, some sound effects as well, sound design tracks and whatever you can.
Oh yeah. I've had some swish hits and risers, like you say, that they don't pay a massive fee when they land, but they land quite regularly. So right. It kind of adds up, doesn't it? Right. So you're like, okay. Although, it's not necessarily as fun as sitting down and writing a complete piece of music when you're just sort of...
Yeah, no, true. Oh, another thing. So here's another thing I see composers do, which I'm not too... Well, I would caution about it. So say, like, I'll give you a case in point. Like after one of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies came out, I forget which one it was, but after that, it was a great score, right? And I started getting a lot of submissions that were tracks based on some of these Zimmer-esque, parody kind of things. And the thing is that at the time, there were no new parody movies coming, so I didn't really need pirate music to begin with. But also, keep in mind that music supervisors are working with studios, and the studios will send us those soundtracks before they're available to the general public. So, we have access to that kind of stuff. So while it may be new and inspiring to you, and by all means, that's a great thing that you're inspired by something, and it might come around again, but just know that, when those soundtracks come out, we've already kind of gone through them, because we get advanced copies of that stuff. So, also listen to it and kind of go, okay, it works for this scene in the movie because it moves in a particular way, but trailers also have a very specific way of moving. So if you are going to base a track based on some soundtrack, make it sound like a trailer piece rather than a feature score piece, if that's what you're going for.
Yeah.
Because they move completely differently, and some, like I said, some editors are fantastic at cutting, and other editors are very, by the numbers, kind of cutting simple stuff and nothing too complicated. And it's, you kind of, as a music supervisor, you kind of have to know what each editor is capable of doing, what they like. I would pitch a piece of music to one editor and it would work for one person, but not for another, even if they were working on the same project. So you got to kind of get to know your audience, whether that be a single editor or whether it be an entire trailer house or whomever. But yeah, don't get discouraged if it doesn't work for one person. It might work for another person.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think that's great advice about always bearing in mind the structures of the end game, as it were, because,
Nice.
yeah, thanks. Specifically, trailers, you've got you stick to your 3 acts, or at least use that as your template. And, for advertising, I like to call it the advertising staircase, where, this is product advertising with 30-second and 60-second spots. They want something new to be happening every 5 to 10 seconds at least, so the track feels like it's moving and developing and growing. Basically,
Yeah, that's the thing, is that, it's, everybody seems to be thinking trailer when, you should be thinking 15-second TV spot.
Yep.
And yeah, they generally have to move much faster. Again, it's always about an interesting piece. So if everybody's doing fast, then somebody comes along and does slow, then that becomes interesting. If everybody's doing slow, then, somebody does fast, and that's interesting. Or if everybody's doing drums, and somebody does something different, it's, it's always about finding that right piece that is going to inspire an editor. And to me, it's all about the editor. I mean, I know that there's a producer, in-house producer, there's an executive, at the studio. To me, it's always the editor. To me, it's always trying to fulfill the editor's vision. And I find that if you can do that, you're, 9/10 of the way there. Yeah. The editors really dig in and really get into what is needed. And so whenever an editor says, I need this or that, or more importantly, even when they say it doesn't work, some of the editors that were the biggest pain for me, especially the ones that would say something like, hey, make yourself available this weekend. And, there goes my plans for, going on, holiday somewhere. And they were tough, but it's the ones that were tough that I learned the most from. They were the ones where I had to dig deeper and I had to learn more. And I think that applies across the board to whatever craft you're doing. It's like, it may be frustrating at the time, but if you dig deeper, you're going to come out the better for it.
Yeah. What lessons can you learn from that situation?
Yeah. Even on the things that don't work,
Yeah, completely agree. Ruben, you've just not only given us incredible advice, but also some great stories. I loved hearing them. Really enjoyed it, and I've so very much appreciate you taking, a good 2 hours out of your weekend to talk to me. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I think it's important to get the word out about this industry because it's so competitive that it's good to know all these things. I haven't I haven't heard every one of your podcasts, but the ones that I have heard, I think you were offering some very solid advice. There's also some stuff, legal stuff that of course you should always get an attorney for, but I get a lot of questions from not just the compositional side, but the marketing side and also the legal side, like, what what it means to get into this particular contract or that contract, or,
Yep.
terms and, whatever, it's a lot to navigate through. So I think you're providing a great service.
Well, thank you very much. Guys, so there we go. That's the end of that. Was our epic 2.5-hour conversation condensed into 2 episodes. I do hope you enjoyed it as much as I definitely did. And I hope you got as much of it, as much out of it as I did. I just found out, I just love hearing these stories, and it's really fantastic now to get some stories from people who were so formative in the trailer music world, and Ruben is by no means an exception to that. The stuff he did for us, and his sort of intuitive growth into the role of a trailer music supervisor and then into forming Music Junkies has kind of shaped my career, and anyone who's listening who's ever landed a trailer placement, it's shaped your career too, chaps. I really do hope you enjoyed it. It was really fun, and I will see you guys next week. You guys are absolute legends. Thank you for taking the time to listen. See ya.